Good evening, good evening, good evening, good evening. Yes, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Cannabis Equity Minutes with Cynthia Mompoint on this wonderful cold evening in April. Oh, it's not that bad. April 23rd, 2021. Joining you this evening, bringing you minutes on what is going on in the cannabis industry and focusing in on Massachusetts. If you are just joining, then you'll know, just want to share with you, the conversation here is really looking at movement in the legal cannabis space across the country through the lens of equity, but focusing here on Massachusetts for several reasons. One, because Massachusetts has and continues to tout itself as being first in the nation when it comes to social equity, particularly the efforts around legislating social equity. And secondly, because of that, there are some very valuable lessons to be learned and that other states can glean from, and opportunities for Massachusetts to continue to improve what it's doing and actually effectuate equity. Because when we look at the data still isn't reflective of what we would say is an equitable participation, which is what we've legislated here in Massachusetts. And so other states that don't even have this measure legislated in their bills, in their statutes, it's a little bit more challenging, and the task of that so much more daunting. I think what folks fail to realize here in Massachusetts is that equity people have a position. We have a position in the state, and even certain judges have identified the fact that, I'm surprised that we don't hear more from the equity people, because of the fact that while we've been open in terms of legal cannabis for the last 3 going on 4 years now. Licenses began being issued in 2018 in Massachusetts. We look at the data, we have 227 operational businesses, 227 businesses that are open and operating, have been authorized to operate and are operating. And of those, we only have 4 that are part of the economic empowerment program, 2 that are part of the social equity program, and then another 12 that are disadvantaged businesses, which include a myriad of folks, including minority businesses, disabled businesses, veteran-owned businesses, et cetera. And so that encompasses more folks who may not have been directly impacted by the war on drugs. And so with this lens, we're looking at what's happening in the cannabis space. And that's what I'm here doing bi-weekly. If you've been tracking with us, providing insight to certain latest happenings and so forth. And I appreciate those of you who've reached out, those of you who continue to support, thank you. Those of you who have questions and reach out to directly to us over at Mass Mother Mary, continue to do so. We're going to continue to bring you that information and highlight from the lens of equity. And with that, I think I dropped all the numbers that I wanted to, and I think we're still at 17 states legalized across the country. Nationwide, the conversation around the Safe Banking Act is continuing. And let's not be fooled, folks, just because if and when the Safe Banking Act passes, that does not necessarily mean there's going to be a big push, or a change in equity, because we all know through the housing industry, through other business industries, that it's still a gauntlet for Black people to get loans from these traditional federally backed entities. So to say that the Safe Banking Act passes and now we're going to see something in equity is not completely accurate. It's going to be interesting to see how states leverage the fact that the Safe Banking Act passed and what they feel they're able to do to provide additional funding for businesses that want to enter into this space. Because let's face it, if you don't have the capital to enter into this space, you're not going to be able to erect a business, particularly not the traditional businesses, a cultivation operation, product manufacturing operation, or a retail business. Massachusetts just opened up their licenses for delivery, and we've set an exclusionary period, first 3 years, delivery licenses are exclusive for social equity and economic empowerment participants. Basically, our equity program people have access to pursuing this license for the first 3 years. And so we have not, that 3-year time frame has not yet commenced. It'll commence when the first application is approved. And so we'll see how that plays out in terms of ensuring that we have equitable participation, at least when it comes to those diversity licenses. And so tonight, I just want to touch upon what's happening with our regulatory body. Yesterday was they convened their advisory board. Now, if you've been tracking with us, if you've listened to me talk about the structure of our regulatory body, you've heard me say countless times that the CCC is an independent agency, so much so, and with the lack of accountability from a board of directors or any type of body like that, that we are in the place where we are right now, where hundreds of licenses went out to multi-state operators, hundreds of licenses that should have been earmarked, or if you will, or allowed for equity participants to enter into this industry first with their priority status, that was taken away. And when the community, when the equity program participants tried to push back against the regulatory body, their response was, there's nothing we can do about it. And there was no oversight. There was no oversight and accountability there. However, the Cannabis Control Commission does have an advisory board. And this time around, they've committed to wanting to hear more from the advisory board. This advisory board consists of about 25 people that have been appointed by our governor, our treasurer, and our attorney general. And these 25 positions represent predominantly professionals in the industry or professionals in the business sector who are weighing in and providing insight to the Cannabis Control Commission on issues of public health. That's one of the subcommittees that they have. Public safety, another subcommittee that they have. Market participation, and let's see, the cannabis industry, and then the CCC recently asked for them to convene a subcommittee around research. Now, what you did not hear is any committee around equity, and to assume that the entire committee, let alone maybe one or two people, have an expertise in that lens and can provide information to the guidance to the Cannabis Control Commission around equity is poor judgment on your part, or on anyone's part. And so we're just calling it out here in terms of cannabis equity news, and we're watching. I will not knock the Cannabis Advisory Board, because it was the advisory board, particularly their market participation subcommittee, that took the time to listen to the public, listen to our team when we brought the PIES program to them and said, hey, we want to increase market participation, and looking at it through an equity lens, here is an opportunity to do so. And so that subcommittee did hear what the PIES program was about, asked questions, asked some hard questions as to how this would look like in Massachusetts, what this would look like in Massachusetts, and felt confident enough in the viability of it and the need for it here so that we can see equitable participation, that they brought it and presented it to the Cannabis Control Commission. If you've been tracking with us on Mass Mother Mary, you know what happens next. However, it's still on the table, and we're still looking to see the state take on the PIES program so that we can hold the industry accountable for their role in promoting equity, because everyone plays a role. The government plays a role. It is irresponsible for people who are in positions of power to say that it's only the government that plays a role in this industry, because it's not only the government that has erected this industry. And to be honest with you, this industry has been operating long before the government has played this legal role in taxation and regulation and so forth. So the industry itself can play a role. It's important that the government partners with us in that effort. And we'll see how that rolls out. We'll see where we have the PIES program in effect. There are other entities across the state, and across the state and across the country that are doing versions of the PIES program. We'll continue to highlight that, so stay tuned for that. But back to the CAB, they have a charge right now to talk about whether or not we should dismantle the vertical integration of the medical marijuana license here in Massachusetts. The only way you can erect any type of medical facility, a medical treatment center, is if you erect all three, which is the cultivation, product manufacturing, and the retail or the dispensing side of it to the medical patients, not retail to recreational customers. This is specifically for medical patients. And in Massachusetts, the entry point for that is significantly higher than on the recreational side. However, from an equity lens, our community needs access to medical marijuana. They need to be a part of that. And so it's important that the advisory board and the Cannabis Control Commission itself factor in how and what measures, what policies need to be in place to allow and facilitate that participation. Because let's face it, just from participating and using the plant alone, our society has dealt with significant trauma. Our communities that have been identified as disproportionately impacted communities already. When you look in these communities, the access to medical marijuana is low. Their participation in the medical program is low. We have over 100,000 patients. Now, the CCC does not release the demographics of who these patients are, and a lot of times that information is not necessarily captured. However, when you go into the communities, where are the medical marijuana facilities? Where are the treatment centers? Where are access to the doctors who are able to and who recognize and support the medical power that this plant offers? We don't see that in our communities. And until that happens, we need to make sure that the conversation in the regulatory space is accounting for that. I don't see that yet. Hopefully we do see that. Hopefully the Cannabis Advisory Board will bring that, but you've heard it here with Cannabis Equity Minutes with Cynthia Mompoint, where we're highlighting the fact, and in certain documents that we've sent to the Cannabis Control Commission, we've also made recommendations around the need for conversations when it comes to medical marijuana to include equity. And so that includes extending the benefits that they have in the equity programs, extending those benefits to equity program participants so that there is an incentive and support to pursue owning, operating, launching medical treatment centers here in Massachusetts. And I think if they do make that motion to dismantle the vertical integration requirement, there does leave room and opportunity for us to enter in that space more easily. So that's that. Let me check in, see if we have any questions or comments. Shout out to those of you who have joined and are listening in on our different platforms. Definitely appreciate the support. Looking forward to engaging you more and more in our news. Let's see what you're saying there, Mass Bay. You are right. We're not seeing that medical equity in our communities, but there sure have been a lot of people talking about equity, though. Oh, absolutely. The conversation around equity, it's a powerful rhetoric, right? It's a powerful tool to get people to listen and say, oh, wow, yes, equity. And it strums the need to feel good as we make billions of dollars on an industry that has existed for quite some time. However, the only people making money were the prison population that they were creating with the Black and brown prisoners that they were disproportionately arresting. And while the underground market, the traditional market, if you will, the government likes to call it the illicit market, while they have targeted these communities, Black and brown communities, decimated these communities in places across the country, decimated families, individual lives, And now to turn around and use that as the flag to say, wow, we need to legalize. I mean, they use it in the as we started off at the beginning of this conversation, they use that language around safe banking. We want to ameliorate the harms done by prohibition. And we know that just saying that folks have access to money from the banks alone is not going to do that, because traditionally, Black and brown folks have had to pay higher interest rates, had to demonstrate greater discipline, if you will, higher credit scores, et cetera, longer credit scores, credit history, deeper investigation, and background checks for them to be able to even access capital from the banks to purchase a home, to erect a business. So to think that it would be any different in the cannabis industry is a fallacy. And so, yes, we hear regulators, we hear politicians, we hear activists, we hear lobbyists, even business folks using this rhetoric language around equity and the need to address the drug war, end the drug war. Some have the fallacy to think that the drug war has ended. It has not, so long as marijuana is listed as a Schedule I drug. Cannabis is listed as a Schedule I drug. So long as that is in effect, the drug war has not ended. So long as there are any type of criminal laws and penalties around the plant in our states, the drug war has not ended. And that is evidence. If you want to challenge that thought process and say, oh, well, no, it's being legalized. The ACLU produced a report last year in 2020, April 2020. Their report showed that despite the fact the plant is legal in, at the time, I think it was about 10 or 11 states. Now we're knocking on 17 states. The arrests continued for cannabis. And what was more of a slap in our face in terms of this rhetoric around equity is that the disparity in arrests, meaning the number of Black and brown people who are being arrested for their engagement in this plant, has increased significantly in comparison to the number of white people who are being arrested in this plant in states where it's legal to engage with the plant. So let's make no mistake that unless there is action backing the rhetoric, that's all it is. It's just words that these people are floating around to gain clout and attention. Here in Massachusetts, we have our leaders who are people who dubbed themselves to be leaders of this movement, and their rhetoric around this is very strong. You know, they will challenge, they are challenging those across the country, celebrities coming into the industry. Not so much big business, unless it's big businesses that have that aren't tied to the framework that established the industry. But they're challenging these folks and asking them, well, you know, what are you actually going to do? Because it's a problem if you come in as a celebrity and you come into our markets and erect a business. Well, first of all, if it's a Black, we're talking to most people, we assume they're talking about Black rappers, Black and brown rappers. They themselves had to go through a gauntlet in their own experiences. And so we don't know individuals in terms of what their trauma has been with respect to the plant and how to engage in it. But before that, we have big business. We have big business here in this market, here in our market in Massachusetts. Let's start there before we start to throw around the words of rhetoric and say, oh, we're for equity. And then turn around, we come in and we see these same folks that are championing equity and saying that this needs to go first are then turning around and backing multi-state operators, some of them with big dollars, some of them tied to the very celebrities that they talked out of one mouth and said that don't need to be in our industry, entering into our space, challenging our local equity program participants, our local small businesses looking to enter into the industry, and creating additional barriers that don't need to exist. So I think I hit on two two separate points here and conflated them, but I just want to be clear. In Massachusetts, what we saw, particularly for those, many folks are familiar with Harvard, Massachusetts, in Cambridge. And in Cambridge, we're seeing this issue where multi-state operators are coming in under the guise of equity and saying that we need to see equity go first. We don't need to see local businesses go first. And it's harming our equity program participants. We see other communities now looking and trying to get guidance as to what they should be doing to ensure that equity is happening. And our Cannabis Control Commission, and I think because so that we're not belaboring the point, and I want to dig in a little bit more on this. I may have to devote another session of our equity minutes to this specifically, but our municipalities are all over the place in Massachusetts. And so when other states take this lesson learned, and we're seeing this in New York already, when the state legalizes, but then turns around and says every town or municipality will then decide what they are going to do around whether or not businesses can be operational in their communities. Pay attention to what the local communities are doing around equity as well, because what we see here is in Massachusetts, we have 365 municipalities, and over half of them, the number is in the around 150, give or take 25. So we won't quote me on this because the numbers shift as towns do their votes, have decided that they want, we don't want to lose you here, IG, have decided that they are banning all types of, any type of business tied to the cannabis in their towns, within their borders, which they have the right to do so if the population voted against it when in 2016 it was on the ballot. So that's fine. However, for the remaining of the towns where cannabis businesses are allowed to operate, now we see it becomes a race to who's first in these towns. And it's important that these towns prioritize equity the same way the state is doing so. And so my people in New York, in Virginia, in these other newly legalized states that are rolling out equity programs, and I know for New York for certain, where they are saying that they're going to allow the local communities to decide whether or not business will be there. Pay attention, and it makes sure that if businesses are allowed to be erected in your town or in any of your neighboring towns, that they're also making that same priority for equity program participants, for equity owners to come in and erect businesses, because if not, you'll find towns that will go to the highest bidder. They'll go to the people who paid their deep pockets to come in, and program participants, we call them program participants here in Massachusetts, those who are part of the equity program of your state, those who the state said, hey, you've been harmed supposedly the most by the war on drugs, and we want to help you, supposedly. And I say supposedly again because the rhetoric is strong. We need to see the action behind it. And the action needs to include dollars. Something else I'll touch on real quickly before we wrap up. But yeah, until we see those efforts, we're going to see it's going to be business as usual. And what's business as usual? We're going to see a white male dominated industry continue to flourish. And all they're going to say is, well, we tried. And the try is going to be the rhetoric. We said we wanted to do something. And so what we're saying here is call out the action, ask for the action, and say, okay, well, here's the rhetoric. I want to see the action. I want to see the bills, the statutes that you're putting that are surrounding equity. I want to see the programs in place that include financial resources to support people in operating businesses, provide wraparound services. You see, that's what the PRIZE program does. It requires that the program participants provide wraparound services. And it's important that the government plays a role, because the government, the regulatory body, is the one that is issuing the renewals for these licenses on a yearly basis. And so if our regulatory body is in alignment and supporting having true equity, seeing ownership in our industry, then we're going to see them say, hey, yeah, we want to see what you're doing, what type of wraparound services that you are providing to ensure that we're seeing more businesses from our equity program participants open up and begin to operate and be successful, not just to say, hey, you know, we donated money to an organization, to some group in the town, and oftentimes these groups don't have connections to those harmed the most by the war on drugs. We've seen people propose donations to the pet organizations, and don't get me wrong, I love our pets. We have a dog coming in the pipeline, so maybe we'll I'll have her on our next live. We'll see, or one of the upcoming lives. But so yeah, definitely love the pets, and definitely think that the work that those communities are important. However, we're talking about equity in the cannabis space. That's what this is about. And I can't go to the dog community. I can't go to Veterinarians Association and say, hey, will you give me money? Will you provide services so I can erect my cannabis business? I don't, that's not what it's for. And so when we talk about resources, positive impact allocations, and funding that's supposed to go to those harmed the most by the war on drugs, we need to keep that same level of focus, that same level of exclusivity to ensure that the people who need it are actually receiving this. And this is why we see the numbers the way they are. One of the data points we're not seeing, and I have not been able to bring it, but we're working on getting this, is when I tell you that there are 4 economic empowerment certificate holders that have erected licenses, and there are 2 social equity program participants that have erected licenses that, and their businesses are operational, right? This is what I'm talking about, 6, because some want to argue and harp on the numbers who have gotten their provisional licenses, what we call it in Massachusetts, which is the first stage, a gauntlet in of itself to achieve, and congratulations to those. However, there's still another gauntlet that still needs to take place, which includes capital resources to get from that provisional license stage. Now you're building out your facilities and secure funding to ensure that you now can operate. And there are levels to this and there are stages to this, which is why we are holding people accountable, not to the rhetoric, and to be honest with you, not just to the actions, but to the outcomes. We're going to continuously pull out the data, because if the data doesn't support the story that folks want to tell you, we want to point that out. And then you have to ask yourself, well, if you're the one before us telling us that equity is important, telling us that equity needs to go first, but then we see the actions that you take don't support that. And even worse, the outcomes are such that we don't see businesses opening up. I mentioned Cambridge earlier. Cambridge has a program, and yet we don't see any businesses opened and operational yet there. And so we need to hold folks accountable for the outcome, not just for the rhetoric. Yes, thank you. You're having this conversation, but we've been having this conversation since the ball has been rolling for legalization, because folks realize, hey, masses will come out, the community will come out and sign and vote on the bill and encourage their legislators to say, hey, legalize it. Yes, we want it. Yes, we don't want Black and brown people to be arrested. But then when it's time to implement the policies, tie funding to the measures that will ensure that equity is happening, that social equity is happening, we don't see that. So until that, it's just dangerous rhetoric. Let's see, we got another comment. I appreciate the engagement. Absolutely, Graham. By his deeds will he be judged. And it's dangerous for this lip service. It's dangerous because the lip service then leads to folks thinking something is happening. Not everyone's paying attention to the industry. Politicians have a lot to be working on in terms of catering to their constituents. And so when they hear the lip service, they say, oh, okay, well, this person said, I heard the word equity. I heard them talk about the people harmed the most by the war on drugs. Yes, okay, I support that. And then keep it moving, not realizing that no action ever took place. And I think about the hard work that the Black Caucus here in Massachusetts, the legislative team put in to ensure that the language around equitable participation was in the bill and to ensure that it made it to statute in such a way that economic empowerment folks were prioritized, in such a way that our communities would receive resources and benefits directly to them for these businesses that were coming into our communities and making money off of this industry. However, that was 2018. Now 2021, we need these same folks to pay attention and show them, hey, look, the state said that they supported this. The state said they put it in legislation the way that you demanded that it would be. And now we had a regulatory body, an independent agency that was charged with implementing this legislation. And what they did was, in fact, a violation. And when they were presented with an opportunity to address that violation, they snuffed at it. And they weren't just presented by myself, who created the PIES program. It wasn't just myself. There were other people who said, hey, take a look at these PIES program, including their own advisory board, which I talked about earlier. I see a couple folks kind of joining in a little bit later on, but yeah, all of this was already presented. And so our politicians need to take a look at what this independent agency is doing around their efforts for equitable participation. If you recall last year, while we were saying, hey, you're not doing enough for us, regulatory body, Cannabis Control Commission, you're not doing enough for us, the CCC turned around and enumerated the efforts that they were rushing now to put together to address the fact that we weren't achieving equity. And one of those measures was the legislative bill that would provide funding for social equity program participants. And that is just sitting with our legislators. No more movement. And the agency plays an important role in saying, hey, look, we need you to take action on this, so that if they so feel that that's the only way they can do it, right? So that we can meet our charge for equitable participation. But remember, I told you, the PIES program is something that the Cannabis Control Commission can turn around in their next meeting, which is in May something teen. It's usually between the 10th and the 19th, their monthly meetings. It's something that they can bring in their new agenda and say, we need to look at how we can do PIES, because PIES will look at these positive impact plans, hold businesses accountable commensurate to the revenue that they're generating, and turn around and target our very pool of equity program participants. So all the vehicles that the Cannabis Control Commission currently regulates and oversees, all the vehicles being the equity program, the second vehicle being the positive impact plans. These are things that they have oversight over. They have the opportunity to do that right now. And so you have to wonder, why is it we're not seeing that? Are they really about effectuating equity? Or is it good luck to you? We're going to stand behind the rhetoric and around wanting to promote equity, trying to promote equity. But since folks want to say capital is a barrier and access to certain things that I guess you would tie to professional access and so forth as a barrier, well, we're trying. We provided technical assistance. If folks want to accept that and say, okay, well, they're trying is not good enough, because guess what? They were not trying. They being the states, the state governments, were not trying when it came to targeting our communities. They were explicit about that. They had funding set aside for that. They had plans, and they leveraged various opportunities, various systems to ensure that they were able to target our communities around their participation with the plant during prohibition. And what are they? I'm not just talking about law enforcement. Remember, we have our education system also, where they turned around and targeted our children who may have engaged in the plant, whether or not they smelled like it, whatever the reason was. And instead of providing them with support through education, treatment center, diversion programs, et cetera, they just facilitated the school to prison pipeline. And so when it comes time to target us, our governments and those in power can be very creative in how they meet their charge. But now it is time for us to effectuate equity, and we need that same boldness. We need that same creativity. And to be honest with you, it's the creativity doesn't even need to be there. The solutions have already been presented. We just need folks to stand up and say, okay, we're going to do this. We're going to do this because we have a charge to meet, and we can continue to be first in the nation in doing this. There are folks out there, businesses in Massachusetts even, who are partnering with equity program participants and saying, hey, yeah, we're going to help you. We're going to help you and provide resources to you, including financial resources, so that you can get into this industry as an owner operator, not just so that you can come work for us, so that you can good luck get a job someplace. And so what we're saying is the state needs to take this on as an entire state charge. Because if you had tuned in to the meeting that was held last month in March with the municipalities, where they had the municipality association sat down and met with a couple of towns and the chairman for our Cannabis Control Commission, the regulatory body here in Massachusetts. And they wanted to get a better sense on various things, particularly around the delivery license. And here it is. These folks are looking to the CCC for guidance, and the CCC is turning around and saying, here, we issued out a 2-page, 3-page document, 4 pages maybe, and good luck to you. And it doesn't have to be that way. It shouldn't be that way. Not when we have an opportunity to effectuate equity. Not when you have people looking to say, okay, how do we do this? What can we do? Not when you have people bringing you solutions and saying, this is what you can do. Send a team around this. You have working groups that Collins talked about in his last meeting, that he's erected working groups around various measures on equity. Well, send a working group around the PIES program. Have them contact me so we can talk about what we can do and to ensure that this state is representative of all of the participants at all levels. Not just our presence in this industry and not just our participation, but also our power in the decision making, right? That's what we talked about on Tuesday, our Cannabis Equity Minutes check-in. We talked about having the power to affect equity, because those who have been in power have not done so. They haven't been able to accomplish that to date. And so let's bring on the people who are in the programs, bring on the people for who have a view and a lens and a keen eye on this equity piece and can say, hey, look, we've been telling you what to do. Program participants, especially our economic empowerment folks who have erected businesses, who have been fighting hard to enter into this industry, know what is necessary and what supports are needed. Social equity program participants have given the state feedback on their technical assistance program and identified the gaps in what is needed. One of the major gaps being funded. We've identified a source for the funding that does not require us having to continue to wait for the legislature. So I've said a couple of things but the message is strong, wanting to hone in and bring this message to folks. Because you got to say things a couple times to people, especially when they've been comfortable hearing the rhetoric and having gotten to the point where they're accepting ACC, accepting the false notion that we cannot have equity because we don't have the resources to support people to get into the industry. It just costs too much. No, that's not true. And we're going to continue to push that conversation. We're going to continue to hold folks accountable. You know, Sean, the executive director, Sean Collins, dropped the ball really on equity program participants. It was strong opportunity. He dropped the ball in his opportunity to engage with the folks who wanted to assist the Cannabis Control Commission in righting the wrong. Assist them and say, hey, look, this is how we can make good on the promise and on the charge that you have. And we all benefit from that. So stay tuned and see how that rolls out. They're going to be working on the strategic planning, the Cannabis Control Commission, and they're looking to the advisory board for guidance on that. You know, again, we appreciate the advisory board for their attunedness to the community to say, hey, look, we're going to listen to folks who have some insight into this and can provide some guidance. Because yes, we're experts in certain areas, but we aren't expert in all areas. And clearly this topic of equity is an important topic where we need to have outcomes that are matching the rhetoric that we're pushing out there. Let's get over these false promises. Just Jules commented over here, you know, yeah, exactly, false promises. Let's hold people accountable and turn these promises into outcomes. And with that, I'm gonna see, I kind of missed a couple comments. Bear with us here. Bear with me. It's a one-woman show right now. But yeah, trying to look at these comments. All right. I think we captured a lot, you know. Again, thank you for those of you who are chiming in. Thank you for those of you who are out there pushing the accountability needle on equity, not just standing on the rhetoric and putting out great speeches. We can go back 40, 50 years and hear great speeches, just replay them right now, and they still hold true. We don't need great speeches. We need great action so that we can see great outcomes. And part of that is going to require that those in power are reflective of those who we want to see participating and whose presence we want to see on the legal side of this industry. And so until we get that, please, my community, my folks who are out here listening and trying to figure out what can we do, let's not get swooped up by the rhetoric and start to, when you hear the words that sound good, and reach out to them and say, okay, so what's the action? And how does that action equate to equity? And if so, look out for that action and look to see what those outcomes are. And with that, we're going to wrap up for the evening. Thank you. Tune in. You can continue to tune in. We're Cannabis Equity Minutes. We're launching that on as many platforms as possible. Also have a blog, really to capture anything that I may have missed on the lives. And then I have a couple of folks who have been reaching out with certain topics that we're going to also highlight on the blog, so that people can see what other folks experience in the industry are around these issues of equity. When, you know, we're working on a couple of local municipalities who say that they want to have a charge for equity, but the pushback that the equity program participants, again, is demonstrating that the actions and the rhetoric aren't aligning. So check out the blog. We're going to have more content on there as well. And yeah, see you on Tuesday. Have a wonderful weekend. Thank you so much. As I end the live, and if I missed out your comment, I'll work hard to engage you next time. Gonna end here. Appreciate you.